German Shepherd wept while eating after 3 weeks in the sun. What happened next was astonishing. The sun blazed mercilessly over the deserted lot, casting sharp shadows over the cracked pavement. The air shimmered with heat, distorting the outline of a frail German Shepherd lying motionless near a pile of discarded debris. His ribs protruded sharply beneath his dirt-matted fur. His once proud posture reduced to a weak sprawl. His eyes, dull and sunken, barely flickered open as he fought against the unbearable thirst consuming him. For 3 agonizing weeks, the dog had endured the cruel grip of starvation and dehydration. His body was shutting down, yet instinct forced him to persist. The occasional warm gust of wind carried the scent of food from distant homes, tormenting him further. He tried to stand, his paws trembling beneath him, but his strength failed. He collapsed with a pained whimper. Desperation clawed at him. His cracked tongue brushed against the dusty ground, searching for even a drop of moisture. Nearby, a filthy puddle, stagnant and filled with debris, became his only hope. He dragged himself toward it, his breath ragged, his vision blurred. The putrid water burned his throat as he lapped at it greedily, knowing it might make him sick but having no other choice. His stomach twisted in hunger. A few feet away, an old plastic bag, tattered and forgotten, rustled in the wind. He sniffed at it desperately, hoping to find even the tiniest scrap of food. But it was empty, just another cruel disappointment. His memories flickered, recalling a time when he had food, warmth, and someone who cared. A hand that once stroked his fur with affection. A voice that had called his name. But those days were gone. Abandonment had replaced love. Loneliness had replaced safety. And hunger had become his only companion. The world continued around him, indifferent to his suffering. Pedestrians passed by, their gazes flickering toward him for a moment before turning away, unwilling to get involved. Some whispered in pity, others scoffed, and most simply ignored him. A group of children, unaware of the depth of his suffering, threw small stones at him, laughing as he barely reacted. A cyclist swerved around him, muttering under his breath about stray dogs being a nuisance. Cars roared past on the nearby road, their tires kicking up dust that settled over the dog's fragile body. None of them stopped. None of them cared. The German Shepherd closed his eyes. He had fought for so long, but he was losing the battle. His body was surrendering. He had once been strong, proud, loved. But now, forgotten and broken, he lay beneath the unforgiving sun, waiting for the end. Alina hadn't planned to take this route, but something led her to that abandoned building on the outskirts of town. As she walked past piles of garbage and debris, a small movement caught her eye. At first, she thought it was just the wind shifting the trash, but then she saw it again, so slight, so weak. Her heart pounded as she stepped closer, and what she saw made her breath hitch. Lying in the dirt, barely alive, was a German Shepherd. His body was skeletal, his ribs pushing against his fragile skin, his fur dull and coated in dust. His sunken eyes held no light, no hope. He wasn't even reacting to her presence. It was as if he had accepted that no one was coming for him. Alina crouched beside him, speaking softly. "Hey, buddy, can you hear me?" There was no response, just a faint rise and fall of his chest. Gently, she reached out and touched his brittle fur. The only sign of life was the weak flinch of his frail body. She swallowed the lump in her throat, realizing how long he must have suffered. How many people had passed by and ignored him? How long had he been waiting for someone to help? She couldn't leave him there. Alina rushed to her car, grabbed a small bowl, and filled it with water. Kneeling beside him again, she placed the bowl near his cracked lips, hoping he had enough strength left to drink. First, there was nothing. Then, slowly, his tongue flicked out and barely touched the water. A faint tremor ran through his weak body as he tried again. With great effort, he managed to take a sip. The sight brought tears to Alina's eyes. Even at his weakest, he was still fighting. Reaching into her bag, she pulled out a packet of soft dog food and tore it open. She placed a small amount near his nose, hoping the scent would awaken his appetite. His nostrils twitched ever so slightly, and with immense effort, he inched his head forward and took a tiny bite. The moment the food touched his mouth, a heartbreaking whimper escaped him. Then, to Alina's shock, tears welled up in his dull, sunken eyes and rolled down his face. She covered her mouth, overwhelmed by the raw emotion of the moment. The pain of eating after weeks of starvation must have been unbearable. His stomach, long shrunken from hunger, struggled to accept food. His throat, raw and dry, could barely swallow. But despite the pain, he didn't stop. He forced himself to eat, knowing this was his only chance. Alina gently stroked his head, her voice breaking. "You're going to be okay. I promise." She knew he wouldn't survive much longer without medical help. Carefully, she wrapped a blanket around his fragile body and lifted him into her car. He was shockingly light, far too light for a dog his size. Laying him gently in the back seat, she turned on the air conditioning to cool his overheated body. His tired eyes flickered open slightly, gazing at her with a newfound sense of trust. "Just hold on, buddy. We're almost there," she whispered, pressing the gas pedal. The drive to the veterinary clinic felt endless. Every few seconds, she glanced back, her heart pounding as she watched his shallow breathing. His chest rose and fell far too slowly. He was slipping in and out of consciousness, and fear gripped her. Was she too late? The moment she reached the clinic, she slammed the car door open and ran inside, her voice trembling with urgency. "Help! I have an emergency." The veterinary team rushed out with a stretcher, lifting the frail dog with expert care. They worked quickly, setting up 4 drips, placing cooling packs on his overheated body, and checking his vitals. Everything was happening in a blur, but Alina could only stand there, frozen, watching helplessly. As the team fought to save him, only one question remained in her mind. Would he survive, or had the damage already been done? The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the air as Alina anxiously waited outside the examination room. The clock on the wall seemed to move slower with each passing second. When the vet finally emerged, his expression was grim. "He's in critical condition," he said gently. "Severe dehydration, extreme malnutrition, and heat exhaustion. His organs have suffered significant strain." Alina felt her stomach drop. She had feared the worst, but hearing it confirmed made her heart ache. "Will he make it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The vet sighed. "We'll do everything we can, but after being in the sun for so long without food or water, his body is fragile. It's going to be a long, difficult road. He's also severely anemic, and his muscle deterioration is extreme. He doesn't have the strength to stand, and we're not sure if his digestive system can even handle food properly right now." Alina swallowed hard, her eyes drifting toward the small window in the door. Inside, the German Shepherd lay motionless on the examination table, hooked up to 4 fluids. His breathing was labored, his body barely responding. But he was alive, and as long as he was alive, she wouldn't give up on him. The following days were agonizingly slow. The veterinary team worked around the clock to stabilize him. They administered fluids, carefully introduced nutrients into his system, and monitored his vitals constantly. At first, he was too weak to eat, so they fed him through a syringe. Every few hours, Alina visited, sitting by his side and speaking to him softly. He didn't respond at first, his body too weak to acknowledge her presence. Then, on the 4th day, a miracle happened. As she sat beside him, gently stroking his fur, his tail gave the faintest wag. It was barely more than a twitch, but it was there, a glimmer of life. Tears filled Alina's eyes. "You're still fighting," she whispered, smiling through her emotions. Little by little, he showed signs of improvement. A few more tail wags, a weak attempt to lift his head. The first time, he willingly licked a spoonful of food from Alina's hand. Each small victory felt like a triumph. The vet remained cautious, reminding her that recovery would be slow. But Alina saw something in the dog's eyes that hadn't been there before: determination. He wanted to live. Physical healing was one battle, but emotional healing was another. It became clear that this dog had suffered more than just starvation. The scars on his body, the way he flinched at sudden movements, and the emptiness in his eyes hinted at a past filled with cruelty. He didn't trust humans. Alina refused to rush him. She visited every day, sitting near him but never forcing interaction. She spoke in gentle tones, letting him grow accustomed to her presence. She brought treats, leaving them beside him without expectation. First, he wouldn't take them. Then, one day, as she sat quietly reading a book, he cautiously leaned forward and took a treat from her hand. It was the first true step toward trust. With patience and love, the dog, whom she had started calling Bruno, slowly began to believe in kindness again. The first time he allowed her to scratch behind his ears, she felt him relax under her touch. The first time he took hesitant steps outside, she celebrated as if he had won a marathon. And then came the moment she had been waiting for. One evening, as she sat beside him, he leaned his head against her lap and let out a deep, contented sigh. Bruno was not just surviving anymore. He was healing, and for the first time in a long time, he knew what it felt like to be safe. As Bruno's health continued to improve, Alina couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his story. A dog like him, a purebred German shepherd, was unlikely to have simply ended up abandoned in such a horrific state. Someone had left him to suffer, and she needed to know why. One afternoon, as she sat with Bruno at the clinic, the vet approached her with a thoughtful expression. "We found something," he said, holding up a small scanner. "We checked for a microchip just in case. He has one." Alina's heart pounded. A microchip meant he had once belonged to someone. "Can you track the owner?" she asked, her voice filled with both hope and fear. The vet nodded. "We're contacting the database now." Within minutes, they had a match. But as the vet read the details aloud, a deep frown creased his forehead. "This is strange." Alina leaned in. "What is it?" He hesitated before answering. "Bruno was reported missing 3 weeks ago. But here's the catch. His registered owner isn't an ordinary person. He belongs to someone important." When Alina finally saw the name on the microchip records, her breath caught in her throat. The listed owner was a high-ranking official from a well-known security agency. Bruno wasn't just any dog, he had been a trained K-9 officer. "How does a trained police dog end up like this?" she murmured, shaking her head in disbelief. As they dug further, the story became even more baffling. Bruno had been part of a specialized search and rescue unit. But 3 weeks ago, during a classified operation, he had suddenly disappeared. His handler had filed a desperate report, claiming that Bruno had been stolen. But no further details were ever released to the public. Alina's mind raced. Had someone taken Bruno and abandoned him? If so, why? And how did he end up alone, starving in the sun? Determined to find the truth, Alina reached out to the authorities. At first, they were hesitant to share information, but once they learned that Bruno was alive, everything changed. His former handler, a man named Officer Mark Jensen, arrived at the clinic the very next day. The moment he stepped into the room, Bruno's ears perked up, his body tensed, and for the first time, Alina saw something different in his eyes: recognition. "Bruno?" Mark's voice cracked as he knelt down. For a moment there was silence. Then, as if something deep inside Bruno had finally awakened, he let out a soft, almost questioning whimper. Slowly he inched forward. Mark's face crumpled with emotion. "You're alive," he whispered. "I thought I lost you." Tears filled Alina's eyes as she watched the reunion unfold. But even as Bruno finally recognized his old friend, one question still lingered in her mind. Who had stolen him? And why had they left him to die? The answers were still out there, waiting to be uncovered. And Alina was determined to find them. The reunion between Bruno and Officer Mark Jensen was nothing short of heartbreaking. The once abandoned dog, who had barely clung to life just weeks ago, now stood before his former handler, his eyes reflecting recognition and hesitation. Bruno had once been trained to obey this man, to trust him with his life. But something had changed. Mark reached out, his voice thick with emotion. "Bruno, buddy, I looked for you everywhere." Bruno hesitated. His body stiffened as if torn between the past and the present. Alina could feel her heart pound as she watched him wrestle with his emotions. This was the same dog who had once flinched at a human touch, who had taken days just to trust enough to eat from her hand. And now, he was standing in front of the man who had once been his entire world. Alina swallowed hard. She had prepared herself for this moment, but it still hurt more than she expected. Bruno had come so far in her care. She had watched him learn to trust again, celebrated each small victory, and devoted her time and love to helping him heal. But could she stand in the way of his past? Mark, too, seemed to sense the weight of the moment. He turned to Alina, his eyes filled with guilt and gratitude. "I never wanted to lose him," he admitted. "He wasn't just a working dog. He was family." Alina bit her lip. "Then how did he end up abandoned like that?" she asked softly. Mark sighed heavily, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. "The night he disappeared, we were working on a high-risk case. He had been trained for search and rescue, but he was also good at sensing danger. We were tracking a suspect, and then, he was gone. We searched for him for days. We thought someone had taken him. The pieces started to fall into place. Bruno had likely been stolen and then discarded when he was no longer useful. But the real question was, what now? Bruno had survived unthinkable hardship, and now he was at a crossroads. Did he go back to the life he once knew, or did he stay with the person who had saved him when no one else had? Alina felt a lump form in her throat. She had never considered keeping Bruno permanently. She had just wanted to save him. But now, as she looked into his deep brown eyes, she realized that she had never loved a dog as much as she loved him. And yet, this wasn't just about her. This was Bruno's choice. The next morning, Alina made her way to the shelter's open field with Bruno by her side. Mark stood a few feet away, his expression unreadable. The plan was simple. Bruno would choose. If he ran to Mark, it meant he was ready to return to his old life. If he stayed with Alina, it meant something else entirely. Alina's heart pounded as she knelt beside Bruno, gently stroking his fur. "Whatever you choose," she whispered. "I just want you to be happy." Then she stepped back. For a few moments, Bruno stood still, his ears twitching as he glanced between them. Mark called his name softly, his voice filled with hope. Alina held her breath, fighting the tears threatening to spill. Bruno took a hesitant step forward, then another. For a split second, it seemed like he was about to run to Mark. But then he stopped. He turned, looking back at Alina. And then, in a moment that sent a rush of emotion through her, he trotted back toward her. Not just a hesitant step, not just a glance. He ran straight to her, pressing his head against her leg. Alina let out a choked laugh, tears spilling down her cheeks as she knelt to embrace him. He had made his choice. Mark smiled, though his eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I think that settles it," he said. "He's found his home." Bruno was no longer just a rescue dog, a lost K-9 officer, or a forgotten soul left to suffer. He was family, and as Alina held him close, she realized that sometimes love wasn't about where you came from. It was about where you were meant to be. For Bruno, home wasn't a place. It was a person, and he had finally found his forever home. Bruno's story didn't end with his rescue, nor did it fade into the background as just another case of an abandoned animal finding a home. What happened to him, the suffering he endured, the resilience he showed, and the love he ultimately found, touched the hearts of thousands. Alina had shared his journey online, initially to raise awareness about animal cruelty, but the response was overwhelming. People from around the world reached out, heartbroken over Bruno's past yet inspired by his incredible recovery. Messages poured in, some from animal lovers who had rescued strays themselves, others from people who admitted they had never truly understood the depth of a dog's loyalty and pain until they saw Bruno's story. News outlets picked up his story, calling him the dog who chose love. His transformation, from a starving, broken soul left to die under the scorching sun to a strong, happy dog who had chosen his own future, became a symbol of hope. But beyond the headlines and viral videos, Bruno's story had a deeper impact. Donations flooded into the local shelter, allowing Alina and her team to rescue even more animals in desperate situations. People who had once looked away when seeing a stray dog on the streets now stopped to help. Some even adopted dogs who had been abandoned, giving them the same second chance that Bruno had received. Bruno had unknowingly started a movement. His survival was no longer just his own triumph. It became proof that kindness had the power to change lives. As Alina watched Bruno run freely through the grassy fields near her home, she realized just how much he had changed. Not just physically, but emotionally. The fear in his eyes was gone, replaced by confidence. The trembling that once overtook him at the sight of a human hand had vanished, replaced by a joyful wag of his tail whenever Alina reached out to touch him. But his story was more than just his own. It was a reminder that behind every stray dog, every abandoned animal, there was a soul that had once trusted humans and had been betrayed. And yet, with just a little love, they could heal. Alina often thought about the moment she had found him, lying weak and hopeless under the sun, and how close he had come to death. What if she had never stopped that day? What if she had looked away, like so many others? That thought haunted her, but it also fueled her purpose. So she made a promise, not just to Bruno, but to every suffering animal out there. She would never stop fighting for them, and she hoped the world wouldn't either. Bruno's story was not just about survival. It was about the choice to care when it was easier to walk away. It was about the power of kindness and the way even a single act of compassion could change a life forever. And maybe, just maybe, it was about something even bigger, the hope that one day no animal would ever have to suffer alone again. Bruno's story is a powerful reminder that every act of kindness matters. There are countless animals out there, suffering in silence, waiting for someone to notice them, waiting for a second chance at life. You have the power to make a difference. If this story touched your heart, consider helping in any way you can. Adopt, foster, or support your local shelters and rescue organizations. Even the smallest effort, a meal, fresh water, or simply raising awareness, can change a life. Share Bruno's story to inspire others, and together, let's create a world where no animal is left to suffer alone. Because sometimes, all it takes is one moment of compassion to turn a tragedy into a miracle.